Beginning in 1492, the first interaction between American people and European explorers began. During this time, Columbus voyages were taking place. African slaves also arrived in the Western Hemisphere and the Mediterranean. Some of the encounters were brutal and traumatic, others were more gradual. 1492's dramatic events begin the many cultural interactions in America, which are still in progress, a complex and ongoing voyage.
The Jamestown settlements of 1607 arose at the intersection of multiple worlds. Their crossings were both typical of their time and ripe with possibilities for the future. After 1607, similar junctures will occur across the globe in histories of states, empires, and people. Our world today is the product of encounters. Jamestown stands as an emblem of both their promise and price.
George Washington was Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War and served two terms as the first U.S. president from 1789 to 1797. George, in his lifetime, worked as a surveyor, then fought in the French and Indian War. During the American Revolution, he led the colonial forces to victory over the British and became a national hero. King George III ruled Great Britain and Ireland, which became the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland in January 1801, from October 1760 until his death in January of 1820. He was the 18th century monarchy who lost the fight to keep control over the American colonies, the third monarchy of the Hanover House and the first to be born in England. In the end, the combination of American tactics, European aid, and limitation imposed on the British by fighting a war from across the ocean were the major reasons why America won their war for independence.
The Declaration of Independence was drafted by Thomas Jefferson between June 11th and June 28th, 1776, one of the nation's most cherished symbol of liberty and Jefferson's most enduring monument. Jefferson expressed the convictions in the minds and hearts of the American people. It wasn't a new idea. Its ideals of individual liberty had already been expressed by John Locke and the Continental philosophers. Jefferson just summarized their philosophy in self-evident truths. This broke the ties between the colonies and the mother's country.
4 years after the U.S. won its independence from England, SS state delegates including George Washington, James Madison, and Benjamin Franklin came together in Philadelphia to compose a new U.S. Constitution. On May 25, 1787, delegates representing every state except Rhode Island came together at Philadelphia's Pennsylvania State House for the Constitutional Convention. The building was also known as the drafting house of the Declaration of Independence and the signing of Articles of Confederation. After being signed September 1787, Congress sent the printed copies of the Constitution to the state legislature for ratification. This represented the greatest expression of statesmanship. The Constitution gives us the greatest form of government the world has ever known.
The Louisiana Purchase has been described as the greatest real estate deal in the history. In 1803, the U.S. paid France $15 million for the Louisiana Territory. The lands acquired stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border. 13 states were taken out from the Louisiana Territory. The Louisiana Purchase nearly doubled the size of the U.S., making it one of the largest nations in the world. The United States and Mexico disagreed on the border between Texas and Mexico. Congress declared war in 1846. Soldiers fought on three fronts. Americans captured Mexico City in 1847. In 1848, Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico agreed to the annexation of Texas and the Rio Grande as the border between Texas and Mexico. Mexico also gave a large area of the land, the Mexican cession, to the United States. Many Americans believed that God blessed the growth of the American nation and even demanded of them to actively work on it. Since they were sure of their cultural and racial superiority, they felt that their destiny was to spread their rule around and enlighten the nations that were not so lucky. The settlers firmly believed in the virtue of American people and the mission to impose their virtues, way of life on everybody else. Their rhetorical background served to explain the acquisition of territories or reasons to go to war, such as the War of Mexico in 1840s.
Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, serving from March 1861 until his assassination in April 1865. Lincoln wanted to stress that the government would fail if it tried to operate as two separate and fighting entities. Slavery and the independence of the states were what was dividing the nation at the time. Lincoln wanted the states to start to operate as a single governing body instead of individual bodies who would try and function on its own. It was the right of a people to start to make their own constitution. Slavery and the independence of the state is what was going on at the time, which led to the Civil War, and Lincoln was trying to tell the states they must function as one, instead of trying to function as their own. The quote-unquote House would not stand being divided against itself. It must work together. In his first inaugural speech, he warned against the southern states seceding from the Union and why it was wrong to divide the Union. In his second inaugural speech, he expressed that he wanted the war to come to an end and that peace should follow. The Civil War of 1861 and 1865 determined what kind of nation America would be. The war answered questions left unresolved by the Revolution. Questions like whether the U.S. would be unified or separated, and if all men were created equally, or if America would continue to be the largest slave-holding country in the world. Two important generals in the war was Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. Robert E. Lee was an American career military officer who was best known for having commanded the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia in the American Civil War. Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th President of the United States following his highly successful role as a war general in the second half of the Civil War. By spring of 1865, all the principal Confederate armies surrendered, and when the Union cavalry captured the fleeing Confederate President Davis in Georgia on May 10, 1856, resistance collapsed and the war ended. The long, painful process of rebuilding a unified nation free of slavery began.
Immediately after the Civil War, the federal government moved to abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment, and then to extend state and national citizenship with the 14th Amendment. 15th Amendment granted African American men the right to vote.
Vice President Andrew Johnson became president. He put Lincoln's plan into action. Southern states had to abolish slavery. Most passed black codes to limit the rights of African Americans. Congress set up the Freedmen's Bureau to provide support for poor blacks and whites. In 1867, Congress put the South under military rule. Soldiers forced states to obey Congress and pass laws letting all men vote. In 1867, Congress impeached Johnson. They said he broke laws. Some Southerners supported Congress. They were called scallywags. Some Northerners went to the South just to make money. They were called carpetbaggers.
America has had its ups and downs and most likely more to come. Over 200 years ago, the world waited and watched for America to become successful, and it has. Generations of Americans have dedicated their lives for great development in America. These successful events were made by regular people who've seen a bigger picture for America. I hope this presentation causes the following generation to feel inspired and that they write down the next chapter in the great American story.